The snow had not stopped for hours. It swallowed every trail, every sound, and every sign of life under a thick, merciless white sheet. Bitter Creek National Reserve was no place for wandering souls in the heart of winter. Most people knew better. Most people stayed away. But not Ranger Thomas Grady. He had given 20 years to these woods, through storms, fires, and sleepless nights searching for the lost and the broken. His hands had mended wounded fawns. His voice had guided panicked hikers back from the edge of despair. But today, Thomas was the one lost, chained to a tree, bleeding, cold, alone. His breath came in short, painful bursts. Blood from a cut on his temple had frozen in place, trailing down across a cheek that had already gone numb. The iron shackles around his chest and wrists dug deeper each time he moved, tearing skin, sending waves of agony through a body already shutting down. 2 days. That was how long it had been since he was ambushed. He had known something was wrong the moment he saw the tire tracks leading into the restricted area. Illegal loggers, maybe poachers. He confronted them like he always did, calm and firm. But this time, they were not interested in talking. They were masked, prepared, and filled with rage. They wanted access, land that Thomas had sworn to protect. When he refused, they made an example out of him. They dragged him into the forest and chained him to a tree. Then they disappeared, leaving him to freeze. To die. Thomas had fought the cold, the pain, and the creeping shadows of unconsciousness. But as the hours turned into days, the fight faded. The forest, which had once been his sanctuary, became his tomb. And then he heard it. At first, it sounded like the wind playing tricks on his mind again. Low thuds, soft crunching in the snow. His eyes, swollen and barely able to open, searched the white. Shapes moved between the trees, dark and low to the ground. He thought. Panic gripped his chest. He could not run. He could not scream. He had nothing left. But then one of the shapes stopped. It stood still in the snow, head tilted, golden eyes locked with his. The figure stepped forward, and Thomas saw the truth. A German shepherd. Then another. Then 3 more. Not wild. Not lost. K9s. They were massive, strong, and silent. Snow clung to their thick coats. Their movements were controlled, precise, like a unit. One of them, a large male with a long scar running down the side of his eye, approached slowly. He sat in front of Thomas, regal and focused. No barking. No chaos. Just presence. Thomas's lips trembled as he tried to speak. His voice was barely more than a whisper. "Good boys." The lead dog tilted his head, then turned. He let out a short, sharp bark, one that echoed with command. The others sprang into motion. One sniffed the base of the tree. Another began circling the perimeter, checking for threats. A third nosed at the chains, inspecting the metal with astonishing care. These were not ordinary dogs. These were trained search and rescue K9s from a mountain unit, out on a winter exercise nearby. Miles away, their handler, Officer Riley Hart, had just realized they were gone. One moment of distraction, and the dogs had broken formation, sprinting into the trees. She knew better than to panic. They had never abandoned their post without reason. Following their tracks through the snow, Riley finally heard a bark in the distance, short, firm, and familiar. She ran. When she reached the clearing, she froze in place. There, half buried in snow and clinging to life, was a man. The dogs surrounded him, forming a protective wall. One licked his face gently. Another pawed at the frozen chains. Riley's breath caught in her throat. "Thomas?" She rushed to him, heart racing. She knew him. Everyone in these woods knew Ranger Grady. "Stay with me," she whispered, pulling out her radio. Her hands worked fast, unfastening the chains, checking his pulse, wrapping her coat around him. "I've got you. We've got you." Thomas opened his eyes again, just barely. He looked at the dogs. "You found me," he rasped. "No," Riley said softly, glancing at the shepherd with the scar. They did. Back at the base, the medics said it was a miracle. A few more hours and he would not have made it. The frostbite would leave scars, but Thomas would survive. And when he did, the first thing he asked was not about his condition, but about the dogs. The alpha, the one with the scar, was named Bear. He had been rescued himself years earlier after surviving a collapsed building during a disaster operation. Now he saved others. In the end, Thomas healed. Not just from the wounds, but from something deeper. In the silence of those woods, when all hope had faded, it was not a voice or a man who found him. It was loyalty, instinct, and something even purer than that. It was a pack. And from that day on, Thomas carried a scar on his arm and a quiet oath in his heart, that sometimes those we think we need to protect are the ones who end up saving us. The dog sniffed at the frozen chain, his breath misting in the icy air. His ears twitched. Then he barked, once, short, sharp, and deliberate. The sound cut through the forest like a flare in the night. Thomas Grady flinched at the noise. His body was numb. His mind barely clung to the last thread of awareness. He did not know if anyone would hear that bark, but the dogs did. And that was enough. In seconds, everything changed. One of the German shepherds dropped low and began digging fiercely at the snow beneath the chain, claws scraping the ice until they revealed a rusted padlock buried deep in the frost. Another leapt up on its hind legs and began barking into the air, loud, clear, rhythmic, almost like a signal, a cry for help that did not need human language to be understood. They were not panicked. They were not guessing. It was as if they knew exactly what had to be done. Thomas tried to keep his eyes open. The cold was so deep in his bones now, it felt like he was floating in nothingness. Time blurred. Minutes stretched like hours. His head drooped forward, then jerked up again as he fought the pull of unconsciousness. His thoughts spiraled in broken flashes. His mother's voice, the laugh of his daughter years ago, the sound of the chain dragging through snow. Then voices. Human voices. And footsteps, crunching fast through the woods. A man's voice, urgent, cutting through the storm. "I see him. Over here." Thomas could not lift his head, but his eyes fluttered open long enough to see a figure coming toward him, dark uniform, badge shining, breath clouding the air in bursts of movement. Behind him were others, handlers, medics. And at the front, standing motionless just a few feet away, was the alpha dog. The large shepherd with the scar across his left eye stared at Thomas, unblinking. There was no confusion in his gaze. No hesitation. Only something deeper. Understanding. Then everything went black. When Thomas opened his eyes again, the world was still. Too still. The cold was gone. In its place, a dull, pulsing ache wrapped his entire body like wet rope. He blinked against the sharp glare of fluorescent lights. The scent of antiseptic filled his nostrils. A low beeping echoed steadily beside him. The infirmary. Warmth wrapped his skin, but it felt foreign, almost unbearable after the cold he had endured. His muscles ached as if he had been torn apart and reassembled. His lips were dry, his throat raw. He tried to speak. A soft voice came beside him. "You're safe now," the nurse whispered gently, placing a cool hand on his arm. "You were nearly gone when they found you. You're lucky they got to you just in time." He swallowed hard. His voice was a brittle rasp. "The dogs, where are the dogs?" The nurse smiled, her eyes kind. "Outside. They've been waiting. Especially the big one, with the scar." Thomas let his head fall back against the pillow. It had not been a dream. The dogs were real. They had saved him. Hours passed in a haze of 4 drips and whispered voices. Later that afternoon, Sheriff Dalton entered the room. He was in his 50s, built like a man who had seen too many winters, his face weathered, his jaw set with the grit of someone who had buried more friends than he cared to count. He pulled a chair close to the bed. "Grady," he said gruffly, "you've got one hell of a story to tell." Thomas gave a small nod. Dalton crossed his arms. How did they find me? Dalton exhaled slowly. Our K9 unit was on a winter circuit. Routine training. They were supposed to be running drills in the eastern woods. Whiteout hit harder than expected, and they got separated from their handler. We thought they were lost. He shook his head slowly, still in disbelief. But instead of returning to the checkpoint, they showed up back at base, barking like mad, covered in snow. Rachel Vance, your old recruit, remember her? She knew something was wrong. Loaded up the ATV and followed them. His voice grew quiet. They led her straight to you. Thomas felt his throat tighten. They saved my life. Dalton nodded. Yeah. But here's where it gets strange. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folder, laying it open across his lap. Inside was a hand-marked map of the forest. You were chained in a dead sector. No patrols. No camps. No trails. That patch hasn't seen human footprints in 5 years. Whoever left you there knew exactly where not to be found. Thomas's eyes hardened. Illegal logging. Maybe poachers. I had been pushing too hard on shutting down their supply routes. They wanted me gone. Quiet. Dalton's mouth twitched. Well, they almost got it. He stood and moved toward the door. But there's something else you need to see. He opened it. Soft paw steps echoed down the hallway. Then, in padded a large German shepherd, calm, steady, scarred. He paused in the doorway, ears perked, then walked directly to Thomas's bedside. Without a sound, he rested his head gently on the mattress. Meet Valor, Dalton said, voice softer now. 8 years old. Former military K9. Decorated. Lost his handler overseas. Hasn't bonded with a soul since. Thomas reached out, his fingers trembling. He touched the thick fur of the dog's neck. Valor closed his eyes and leaned into the touch like it was the only warmth he had ever trusted. Rachel Vance stepped in next. Her snow-blonde hair was tied back in a braid, her eyes sharp but warm. Valor has never acted like this before, she said, voice hushed with awe. Not since his partner died. She looked at Thomas, her voice faltering. It was like something shifted in him when he found you. Like he knew. Thomas stared down at the dog, his voice barely above a whisper. I was not just another rescue, was I? Rachel shook her head. He stayed by your side the entire time. Would not move. Even when we put you on the sled, he kept checking to make sure we were not taking you away for good. Thomas smiled faintly, his eyes glistening. He chose me. Then, just as a flicker of peace settled into the room, the door burst open. A deputy stood there, pale, breathless. Sheriff, you need to come. We found something just outside Sector 9. Fresh tracks. Snowshoe prints. And a campsite. Still warm. Dalton's face turned to stone. They're still in the forest. Thomas sat up slowly, pain shooting through his ribs. Valor lifted his head, alert, ears twitching. Rachel leaned toward him. What is it? Thomas's voice was low but firm. They tried to disappear me, but I am not the one hiding anymore. Dalton grabbed his coat. We'll finish what they started. And this time, we've got help. Thomas reached down, gently running his hand through Valor's fur. Let's finish it together, partner. The dog's tail thumped once against the floor. Some rescues are just survival. Others are the beginning of something unstoppable. Sheriff, something's wrong. The deputy's voice cracked slightly over the radio. Sheriff Dalton turned, eyes narrowing. The tone said everything before the words finished landing. We found tire tracks near Sector 12. Fresh ones. And cut chains. Still warm to the touch. Someone was out there last night. Dalton's jaw tightened. The warmth drained from his weathered face. They came back. Across the room, Thomas Grady sat upright, a bolt of pain ripping through his ribs. He winced but pushed through it. They think I'm still out there, he said hoarsely. They're tying up loose ends. A sudden hush swallowed the room. Even the sound of the falling snow outside felt distant now. Valor, lying at Thomas's feet, raised his head. His ears perked, tail stiff, body locked in stillness. Something was wrong, and the dog felt it before any of them did. The ranger station, usually filled with the subtle noise of boots, papers, and hot coffee, now felt like a haunted chapel. Deputies murmured behind closed doors. Phones rang unanswered. Sheriff Dalton had not left the comm room since the tracks were found. And Thomas sat by the side window, wrapped in a thick thermal blanket, bandages wrapping his hands like a boxer after a long fight. His jaw was mottled with bruises, his ribs ached with every breath, but his mind was crystal clear. He had learned to live in pain. What haunted him now was something else. The forest. It felt off, like it was watching. He stared outside. Snowflakes drifted lazily past the glass, layering the pine trees in silence. But deep in the woods, something moved. He could not see it, but he could feel it. A pressure. A presence. The forest was holding its breath. Valor exhaled beside him, low and steady. His eyes, old and scarred, stared at the door, not blinking, not afraid, just waiting. Thomas looked at that scar again. It traced a crooked path over the dog's left eye, a deep old wound that could have ended him. But it did not. And that, Thomas knew, was what mattered. Pain was not the end of a story. Sometimes, it was the beginning. Rachel Vance entered quietly, carrying 2 steaming mugs. Her braid was tighter than usual, her expression focused. "You're still refusing the painkillers?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. Thomas took the cup from her, his hand brushing hers. "They make my head too cloudy. I can't afford that right now." She sat beside him. Her voice dropped to a low whisper. "We've got federal investigators on the way. This thing, it's bigger than poaching. Too clean. Too deliberate. Whoever did this had maps, equipment, and the kind of nerve only a professional has." Thomas nodded slowly. "And they made one mistake." Rachel followed his eyes down to Valor. "He wasn't supposed to be there," Thomas said. "None of them were. But they found me. They weren't lost." Rachel blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "No one sent them." Thomas leaned in, voice steady. Then something else did. There was silence between them. Not confusion, realization. Rachel had spent her whole career training K9S. She had seen instinct. She had seen miracles. And she knew this went beyond either. "He hasn't left your side once," she said quietly. "Even when I call him, he waits for your permission." Thomas's gaze lingered on the dog. "He reminds me of the ranger I used to be. Before I got comfortable. Before I got careless. Loyal. Relentless. Always ready." Rachel hesitated, then asked, "Do you think he could work with you?" Thomas frowned. "He's retired. They said too much trauma. Said he'd never pair again." Rachel's voice softened. "But Valor's never bonded like this. Not since the war. If you wanted to keep him, it's not just paperwork. You'd need to train again. Rebuild the bond. But..." She smiled faintly. "I think he's already chosen." Thomas looked into the dog's eyes. There was no need for words. Valor met his gaze, still and calm, but beneath that, fierce loyalty, forged not by duty, but by something even stronger. "If he's willing," Thomas whispered, "then I won't let him go." Just then, a bark cut through the silence like a knife. Controlled. Focused. Valor stood up, fast. Ears tilted back. Body tense. His entire frame had turned into a weapon aimed at something unseen. Rachel jumped to her feet. "What is it, boy?" Another bark, this one louder. Urgent. Then a sound. Faint. Metal scraping against metal. Thomas's head snapped around. That was the garage door. He grabbed the ranger radio from the bench. But before he could press the button, the lights died. Darkness flooded the room in an instant. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the shadows turned into questions. Rachel drew her flashlight, flicking it on. The shaky beam cut across the room in trembling yellow. "Stay here," she said, moving toward the hallway. "I'll check it out." But Valor growled, deep, low, primal. And then he moved to block the door. Rachel froze. Thomas's voice was quiet, but unshakable. "He doesn't want you to go alone." Outside the window, a shadow flickered, just for a second, then vanished. Glass shattered. Far end of the station. Rachel grabbed her radio. "We've got an intruder. South entrance." "Repeat." The hallway lit up with a muzzle flash. A shot. Screams. Footsteps. Thomas stood, every nerve in his body screaming, but he moved forward anyway. Valor did not wait. He lunged forward, teeth bared, every muscle in his body a silent promise. Whatever darkness had returned, this time, it would not win. The sound cracked like thunder through the dim corridor. Thomas jolted, instincts taking over. His hand flew to the wall, snatching the only weapon in reach, an old hatchet, worn but sharp enough to kill. "We need to move." He barely whispered it. But Valor was already ahead, moving like smoke, low to the ground, eyes alert, every muscle ready. Rachel followed behind, sidearm raised, flashlight jerking with each careful step. The backup generator had failed. The air was thick with silence and tension, broken only by the crunch of their boots on debris and the ragged breath Thomas fought to control. They slipped past the sleeping quarters, past the mess hall, now filled with ghostly shadows cast by the flashlight's narrow beam. Every corner felt like a threat. Every door, a possible trap. Then they heard it. A voice. Confident. "Told you he wouldn't die out there." Thomas stopped dead in his tracks. His blood turned to ice. That voice, too calm, too familiar. They were not here to finish a job. They were here to erase evidence. No survivors. Footsteps echoed off the concrete walls. Slow. Methodical. Whoever was inside the ranger station had time on their side. They were not worried. They thought they were in control. Thomas's grip on the hatchet tightened, his knuckles white. His body screamed with pain, bruised ribs, torn muscles, but he pushed it down. Pain could wait. Lives could not. At his side, Valor became a shadow, gliding noiselessly with head low, tail stiff, tracking the threat with terrifying precision. Rachel moved with them, flashlight cutting the dark in short bursts. Her eyes stayed on the corners, her finger curled tight around the trigger. They reached the supply room, empty. The south hallway, silent. Then came the sound. Subtle. Human. Breathing. Not theirs. It came from behind the generator room door. Thomas raised his hand, a silent signal to freeze. Valor's ears twitched. He went still, his whole frame locked like a loaded spring. Thomas leaned close to Rachel, voice low. "We open that door, we don't know what's waiting. You ready?" She gave a tight nod. No fear. Just focus. Thomas took a breath and kicked the door open. Nothing. At first glance, the room looked abandoned. Rachel's flashlight swept across oily tools, a broken chair, and a tipped-over fuel can. Then, a glint. Back. Rachel shouted. Too late. A figure lunged from behind the generator, crowbar swinging wide. Metal sliced through the air just inches from Thomas's head. Clang. Thomas ducked, dropping to one knee. But Valor did not wait. The dog launched forward, a blur of teeth and fury. His jaws locked onto the attacker's arm, dragging the crowbar to the floor. The man screamed, more anger than pain. "Stupid dog!" Thomas surged forward, seizing the man's free arm and slamming him against the wall with brute force. "You were supposed to kill me and disappear, huh?" The man thrashed, but he was no match. Valor had him by the arm. Thomas by the throat of his failure. Rachel stepped in fast, cuffing the attacker while reciting his rights in a firm, unwavering voice. But the man only grinned through bloody teeth. "You think I'm the only one?" Thomas froze. Rachel did not hesitate. "Check the perimeter. Now." They left the man restrained and bolted out into the hall. Thomas grabbed the radio on the way. From outside the station, flashlights flickered. Shadows moved. Then, gunfire. Pop, pop, pop. West side. "They're breaching the garage," a deputy screamed through the static. Thomas's heart dropped. He turned to Rachel, eyes burning. "They're not here for me anymore. They're here to erase everything." Valor barked, sharp, urgent, then tore down the hallway toward the front entrance. Thomas followed, lungs heaving, every step agony, every second critical. Through the side window, they saw them, two masked figures prying into the garage, weapons drawn. One snowmobile already hotwired, its engine growling like a beast ready to run. "They're heading for the North Ridge," Rachel said. "If they hit the trees, we'll lose them." Thomas looked at Valor. "Can you stop them?" The dog did not wait for the command. He vanished through the emergency exit, paws barely touching the snowy earth as he sprinted into the dark. Thomas and Rachel followed, snow crunching beneath their feet, the wind screaming around them. In the clearing beyond the garage, the snowmobile's headlights flared. One of the masked intruders climbed aboard, revved the throttle, and turned to flee into the white. Thump. Valor crashed into him mid-chest like a missile, knocking the man clear off the snowmobile. He landed in a heap, groaning in the snowdrift. The second intruder raised a weapon. Thomas moved first. He hurled the hatchet. What? The handle smashed into the man's wrist, the gun flying from his grasp. Rachel tackled him with a grunt, pinning him down hard. It was over in seconds. Deputies stormed in behind them, cuffing the intruders and locking down the scene. Thomas stood in the snow, lungs burning, his clothes soaked through. His body trembled, not from cold but from the adrenaline crash. Then he saw him, felt, limping toward him, blood streaking his fur. A bullet had grazed his leg, but his eyes burned bright. Proud, still standing. Thomas dropped to his knees in the snow, arms wide. Valor walked straight into his chest and rested his head against Thomas's heart. "You saved us," Thomas whispered, voice cracking. And somewhere in that silence, through pain, fear, and frozen air, something powerful settled between them. Not just survival, brotherhood. "Again," Thomas whispered, holding him close. "You saved everyone." His arms wrapped tightly around Valor, the snow clinging to their forms like nature itself refusing to let go of the moment. But beneath the relief, something deeper stirred inside Thomas. This was no longer just about a rescue. This was something else, a calling, a line drawn in blood and betrayal. Inside the ranger station, the warmth was returning, but the atmosphere remained frozen. Deputies moved carefully, their voices hushed. The walls felt different now, heavier, like they were holding secrets too long kept in silence. The attackers had been separated, their hands cuffed, their eyes unrepentant. But none of them had spoken a single word. No names. No backstories. No demands. Just silence. Valor lay on a padded mat in the station's medical bay. His bandaged leg rested gently, the wound superficial, but the battle, much deeper. Thomas knelt beside him, hand resting on his loyal friend's chest. He felt the slow, even rhythm of the dog's breathing. Calm, vigilant. Watching the door like he knew this was not over. Rachel entered quietly, a folder clutched in her hands, thick with incident reports and security footage. "They're refusing to talk," she said, her voice low. "All three of them. No IDs. No digital footprint. They're ghosts." Thomas frowned, his eyes narrowing. "That doesn't make sense." They knew too much: patrol routes, blind zones, the generator's location. Rachel hesitated, then handed him a smaller folder, slim, aged, yellow at the corners. That's why I checked old access logs. Look at the date. Thomas flipped it open. His face darkened. For weeks ago, a civilian contractor had been granted short-term clearance for equipment maintenance on the wildlife cameras. Name, Jack Melton. Approved by Thomas Greer. Thomas never signed that approval. His eyes scanned the form again, this time slower. The signature looked like his. The handwriting was close, but not exact. He looked up at Rachel. Someone faked this. Rachel nodded. Not just someone. Someone with internal access. Thomas's jaw clenched as the weight of it hit him. You're saying this came from inside? Rachel said nothing. She did not need to. That night, after the noise died down and the deputies filed away their reports, Thomas stepped outside for air. Snow fell in soft spirals from the moonlit sky, blanketing the station in deceptive calm. The world looked untouched, innocent, but he knew better. Valor limped beside him, tail swaying gently, nose to the air, always watching, always ready. Then he saw the figure, Sheriff Dalton, standing near the north perimeter, hands in his coat pockets, facing the trees. Strange. Dalton turned at the sound of footsteps, offering a smile that did not reach his eyes. Couldn't sleep either? Thomas stopped a few feet away. Something like that. Dalton gestured to the woods. Funny, isn't it? After all these years out here, the biggest threat wasn't the mountain lions or the blizzards. Thomas said nothing. Dalton sighed. A long, tired breath. Then he turned, face drawn. They were just trying to make a deal. That's all it was supposed to be. Thomas's spine stiffened. What? A quiet offer. Some cash. Turn a blind eye. Just a few permits. Nothing dangerous at first. But then they said you were in the way. Always digging. Always asking questions. Thomas stepped forward, eyes burning. You forged my name. You brought them in. And you left me in that storm to die. Dalton's gaze fell. You were never supposed to come back. Not from that. Then his eyes flicked to Valor. But I didn't count on him. Valor growled low, his body tense. Dalton raised a hand, slow and cautious. Look, walk away from this and I can make sure it disappears. You and the dog retire early. Get your medals. No more trouble. Thomas's head shook slowly. You think after everything, you think I'll stay quiet? Dalton's hand moved to his belt. Too slow. Valor lunged. Dalton hit the ground with a grunt, pinned under 100 pounds of trained justice. This time, Thomas did not call him off. He stepped forward and stared straight into Dalton's pale, shaking eyes. You betrayed the badge. You betrayed me. You betrayed everything we ever stood for. By the time Rachel and the deputies arrived, the truth was already unraveling. Thomas handed over the forged documents. Rachel went straight to the logs, pulling timestamps and access trails. And Valor, still limping, sat by Thomas's side, his eyes never leaving Dalton. The man who had once led them, the man they had trusted for over a decade, was arrested in silence. But even as the doors closed behind Dalton, Thomas knew it was not over. He turned to Rachel, his voice steady but heavy. Everything he touched is compromised. Every permit, every report. We have to rebuild from the ground up. Rachel nodded without hesitation. Then we rebuild. Together. Thomas looked down at Valor, then to the sky. And not without him. That night, Valor would not rest. He paced the halls like a guardian, alert, ears perked. Something inside him had shifted too. He had saved a life. He had exposed a lie. And he was ready for whatever came next. Thomas sat beside him in the dim quiet of the hallway, watching snow gather on the windowsill. He placed a hand on Valor's back, firm and full of gratitude. We were just rangers. Now, we're something else. And in that silence, broken only by the wind and the creak of timber above, a bond formed deeper than duty. It was not just a man and a dog. It was a promise. No more silence. No more shadows. Only truth. And those who would stand for it. You knew before any of us. You felt it, Rachel said, her voice barely a whisper over the crackling fire. Thomas stood silent, staring into the flames. Valor lay at his feet, his eyes fixated on the shifting shadows outside, as if he, too, could sense the dark undercurrent lurking just beyond the edges of their world. Something in Thomas's gut told him this was far from over. It was only just beginning. The days that followed were steeped in heavy silence and an endless cascade of snowflakes. Investigators from the state capitol arrived, their presence like a cold wind sweeping through the once familiar halls of the ranger station. They combed through every corner, every crevice, digging up permits, records, and histories, exposing the network of lies Dalton had woven for years. The truth was slow to come, each piece a jagged shard cutting through the illusion of safety they had once known. The truth wasn't clean. It was messy, ugly, and dangerous. There had been illegal land sales, forged access to sensitive areas, criminal groups using the park as a front, and rangers who had been quietly pushed out or silenced. The walls of Thomas's trust in Dalton, once firm and unyielding, came crashing down with each new revelation. Over and over again, Thomas sat for interviews, his voice steady but his eyes weary, too weary. Betrayal throbbed in his chest like an old wound. He had trusted Dalton. They'd worked side by side for years, built cabins together, fought fires together, shared laughs, shared beers, shared dreams. But the man who once handed him his badge, who once called him brother, had left him to die, chained like an animal in the storm. Yet Valor never left his side, not once. The dog followed him through every interview, every briefing, every lonely midnight walk through the snow, never asking questions, never judging, just being there. And somehow, that was enough. The deputies who once saw Valor as just another K-9 unit soon began to see him as something more. They began treating him like a soldier, like a brother. The bond between man and beast was no longer just a professional one. It was something deeper, something almost mythic. Valor wasn't just a dog. He was Thomas's lifeline. He was family. On the third night after Dalton's arrest, Thomas stood alone at the perimeter of the station, the cold biting at his skin, the stars glittering above like shards of ice. The silence was heavy, suffocating. His breath came out in slow, visible clouds, a reminder that the world around him was still, and yet he wasn't. Rachel approached quietly, her footsteps muffled by the snow. "They're offering you a transfer," she said, her voice low. "Back to Helena. Full benefits. Counseling. Desk job." Thomas didn't answer right away. His gaze dropped to Valor, lying at his feet, tail swaying in lazy arcs when their eyes met. "Do I look like someone who belongs behind a desk?" Thomas finally asked, his voice laced with a quiet frustration that only those closest to him would understand. Rachel gave a tired smile. "Didn't think so." Thomas turned his gaze back to the snow-dusted trees, his face hardening. "They're not going to stop, are they?" Rachel's smile faded, replaced by something darker. "No. There's too much money buried in these trees. Too many names we haven't uncovered yet. Too many of them still out there." Thomas nodded slowly, the weight of the words settling heavily on his shoulders. "Then I stay." Rachel reached into her jacket and pulled out an envelope. "I thought you'd say that." She handed it to him. "This is your official transfer into the K-9 division, if you want it. Valor's been cleared for reactivation under your command." Thomas opened the envelope, his fingers lingering on the edges of the crisp file inside. His name. Valor's name. A designation, Ranger Tactical K-9 Unit Echo. "You really think I'm qualified?" Thomas asked, his voice skeptical but tinged with something else, something he hadn't let himself feel in a long time. Rachel glanced between him and Valor, the two of them a silent, inseparable team. "I think you already are." Thomas knelt beside Valor, running a hand down the dog's thick fur. Valor met his gaze, eyes steady, unblinking. "What do you say, partner?" Valor barked softly, a low, confident sound, one that said it all. But even as the days passed, the peace was fragile. It felt thin, like glass ready to shatter. The sense of being watched returned, like an old shadow slipping back into their lives. Deputies began reporting strange disturbances, tracks in the snow that didn't match any known wildlife, equipment moved out of place without explanation, short bursts of radio interference at night. There was no concrete evidence, just unsettling things that gnawed at the edges of their peace. Then, one evening, Thomas sat alone in the communications cabin, reviewing reports. The hum of the security monitor suddenly cut off, flickering to static, then blackness. He tried to reconnect the feed, but the signal was jammed. The hair on the back of his neck stood up, and then Valor stood beside him, ears perked, muscles tense. The dog's low growl rumbled in his throat. A second later, the emergency lights outside flickered on, bathing the station in a harsh, red glow. Thomas grabbed his flashlight and service weapon, stepping out into the cold. Valor moved ahead of him, body low, nose to the wind, guiding him with every step. They reached the edge of the station's fence, the ground untouched by footprints, the world eerily silent. And then, there it was. A soft clink, the unmistakable rattle of chains, the same sound that had haunted Thomas in his sleep for weeks. He turned sharply to his right, and in the distance, a figure darted behind a tree. "Hey!" Thomas shouted. "Show yourself." No response. Just the whisper of wind and snow. Valor growled again, louder this time, more urgent. Before the figure disappeared into the darkness, a glint of silver caught the moonlight. A badge. Thomas's blood ran cold. It wasn't over. Someone from the inside. Someone else. Powerful, isn't it? The story doesn't just end with Dalton's arrest or the truth coming to light. There's always more secrets buried in the snow, more people hiding in the shadows. This is only the beginning. And Thomas? Valor? They're not backing down. It was the kind of night where every sound felt amplified. The distant creak of wood, the soft rustle of branches in the wind, the howl of the wind against the windows. But it wasn't the wind that kept Thomas awake. It was the image that haunted him, the glint of a badge flashing in the moonlight. He couldn't shake it. The meaning was clear now. Dalton wasn't acting alone. No, someone else in uniform, someone with clearance, with access, was still out there, working from the inside. And if Thomas knew anything, it was that when you're up against someone hiding in the shadows, the real danger is never far behind. The snow stopped falling by sunrise, leaving the forest eerily silent, as if the world itself held its breath. The landscape was blanketed in pristine white, but the peace was deceiving. The calm before the storm. Rachel assembled a small response team, but as they scoured the area around the ranger station, they found that the tracks left by the intruder had been expertly covered, no signs, no trace. Whoever had come near the station knew how to erase their presence. Military precision. Thomas glanced at Valor, who stood at his side, unblinking, his eyes focused on the trees. The bond between them was no longer just about instinct. It was a deep trust forged through survival. The kind of trust where neither had to speak to understand the other's thoughts. Valor wasn't just a dog, he was family. And in that moment, Thomas knew. Something was coming. Later that afternoon, Thomas and Rachel drove out to one of the inactive patrol cabins on the edge of Sector 9. The area was a desolate place, especially during winter. Dalton had signed off on the cabin months ago, declaring it unsafe for winter use, but Thomas's gut told him something else. Something was off. That cabin would hold the answers. As they arrived, Valor leapt from the back of the truck, his nose twitching the moment his paws hit the ground. He sniffed the air, hackles rising, and Thomas didn't need to ask what the dog sensed, he felt it too. Inside the cabin, the wood stove was cold, long since abandoned. But there were fresh footprints in the snow just outside, and the lock had been broken, then hastily reattached. Someone had been here recently. Rachel drew her weapon, her instincts sharp. "We're not alone," she said, her voice steady, but Thomas could hear the tension in it. Thomas moved quietly, Valor at his heel, his every step calculated. They reached the back room, and that's when it happened. A gunshot rang out, shattering the silence, splintering the cabin's wooden frame. Rachel ducked behind the door, and Thomas dove to the side, but the bullet wasn't meant for them. It hit Valor. A sharp yelp split the air as Valor collapsed, his leg bleeding fast. Thomas's heart thundered in his chest. "Stay with me, buddy. Stay with me," he whispered through gritted teeth, pressing his hands over the wound, his vision blurring with panic. From the shadows, the shooter stepped forward, unmasked. Mark Howie, a young deputy, one of Dalton's trusted men. "You should have stayed dead, Ranger," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You think locking up Dalton stopped anything? He was just the face. I'm the one who built this." Thomas stood slowly, blood staining his hands, his fists clenched with fury. "You shot him. You shot my dog." Mark didn't flinch. "That dog cost us everything." Rachel moved swiftly, her training kicking in. 2 quick steps and a blow to the back of Mark's knee dropped him to the ground. Before he could even reach for his weapon, she had him cuffed. Thomas's focus never wavered. He was already back at Valor's side. His heart was in his throat, but Valor's breathing was steady, even if it was shallow. "We need to move now," Rachel said, her voice urgent. "I'll call in the evac team." But Thomas wasn't listening. He gently wrapped Valor in his jacket, lifting him into his arms. "Don't you give up on me, buddy," he whispered. "Not now." Hours later, at the State Canine Center's veterinary unit, the news was both a relief and a reminder of how close they had come to losing everything. The bullet had missed Valor's vitals by mere inches. Surgery would be needed, but he would survive. Through the entire procedure, Thomas never left Valor's side. His partner, his brother, his reason for surviving. News crews arrived, cameras rolled, and Thomas became not just a victim, but a voice. The voice of those who protect, serve, and sacrifice without ever asking for glory. The story of the chained ranger and the K9 who saved him spread like wildfire. The media painted him as a hero, but in his heart, Thomas didn't feel like one. He had simply done what was right. When Valor finally opened his eyes after surgery, he looked directly at Thomas. A slow, tired wag of his tail. It wasn't much, but it was enough. "You're coming home, partner," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion, but his smile was a rare, genuine thing. Valor had come back to him, and together, they would keep going. Weeks passed. The forest thawed, the snow turning into spring's delicate bloom. A new patrol unit was formed, cleansed of the rot that had infected it before. Thomas was named the lead of the newly formed Echo K9 task force, and Rachel became chief of station operations. They rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal, and they did it together. And Valor? He returned to the field. Older, a little slower, but stronger than ever. Every patrol they walked side by side. And every person they protected knew that if danger ever came again, loyalty would be waiting. Eyes sharp, heart unbroken. And though the past had tried to break them, it was nothing compared to the bond they shared now. They were more than just a ranger and his dog. They were a team. They were family. And family? Family never gives up. True courage doesn't wear a cape. It walks on 4 legs. It runs through forests, climbs mountains, and fights when it seems there's no hope. It never gives up. Not for anyone. Not for anything. If you believe in that kind of loyalty, share this story. Like this video. And remember, sometimes the most powerful heroes are the ones who never ask for praise, who just do what's right. Subscribe to the channel, and share this message with someone who needs to believe in the power of trust, sacrifice, and loyalty.